And so we were collecting data and talking to team members. And I walked up to a team member to ask a question. And then I realized he was looking at football scores. And I said, "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize you were on break." And he said, "I'm not on break." And I stopped and I looked, and there was 50 some calls in queue. And I said, "Well, if you're not on break, then why aren't you answering the phone? There's like 50 calls in queue." And he said, "Just people wanting their money."
Welcome to the Leader's Mindset, where we bring you illuminating conversations from impactful leaders in business and our communities. Today, we're talking to facilitator, coach, and entrepreneur Laurie Clarke. She helps companies transform their teams using a scientific basis. Welcome to the show, Laurie.
Hi, it's nice to be here.
Well, it's great to have you here. For everyone else who's watching or listening, hit like, comment, and share right now so we can spread the word and bring these game-changing ideas to as many people as possible. And don't forget to subscribe. You're not going to want to miss any of the upcoming conversations we have with amazing leaders like Laurie. So, Laurie, what does it mean to use a scientific approach to transform a company? And why do so many businesses get transformation wrong?
It's a great question. So there's really three elements to any business, and it's based on a customer need that has to be met. And then it comes with how a company is designed, and then the people and the technology that are used to enable that experience to happen for customers. And so to apply a scientific method to a transformation or design of a company means that you're really getting to know at the core level, at the root cause, what is the customer need? How does a company actually function? What is its design? How does that work on a day-to-day basis? And then what are the scientific ways that you can use, data to look at what are human drivers, what are the technology drivers that can be in place, and how those can all work together to create the best, thriving business that's possible.
Yeah, so it's not just about technology, because I think what a lot of companies think about when they think transformation is let's get some technology tools or refresh our tech stack, right? And it's not just about people, because sometimes a company transforms by firing a bunch of people and bringing in a bunch of new people, right? So it's about the combination and using some real clear data collection and measurement to understand what we need to do and choose the right combinations, right?
Yeah, it's also about experimentation, because there are certain elements that aren't going to have necessarily the quantitative data that we think about now. And sometimes our quantitative data is not very it's muddied, so if you think about customer data that's online or through surveys, and you start looking at paid influencers and paid for reviews, and you think about, how many times have you been asked before you could proceed to a step to give ratings? You're like 10, 10, 10, 10, 10, 10, 10. Just get me to the next thing. I'm actually very agitated. I'd love to give you all a 1, but I'm afraid if I give you a 1, you're going to ask me more questions. So, it starts becoming about a little bit of, the science based in the data and in how things are working, but also with that human element and that finesse and being able to go out and get that qualitative data and understanding how do people work? How do your customers work? How do your employees work? And then combining that with things that you have at your, the resources like technology that can come in and augment those experiences. It's all three, and how the three of those elements combine that make the difference.
It reminds me a lot of when we're in the airplane and we're flying on instruments and we can't see what's going on outside the airplane. There's no visual reference. And we're constantly doing what we're calling cross-checking to make sure the instruments are all telling us the same story, and that one instrument isn't telling us something wildly different than what the other instruments are telling us. And if that happens, we have to figure out which instrument we believe, right? We have to figure out which data we believe in order to make good decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. I worked with a pilot before, and he had a private plane, and he used to love flying to anything that was within flyable distance. And it's the elements that pilots use with regards to when something goes wrong, they do have a checklist. They have an ability to go back and kind of go through it systematically. And what is interesting is that businesses don't typically do that. They typically think they know what they're going to do. They create a lot of policies and procedures, and they're all hidden in structures and in their computer systems. But when it actually happens, they don't stop and go back to that. And so one of the things that, I provide to clients is a way to develop a systematic way of thinking about problem solving and critical thinking about to do exactly what you just said in a business environment. We have it with medical situations, we have it in aviation, but we don't usually apply that same way of thinking to businesses that aren't life and death.
Yeah, and I want to come back to all of that in a bit. But first, I want to talk about you specialize in experiential learning. What is it, and why does it work better than other methods with your clients?
Yeah, so information is very, helpful, and there's no shortage of it. But for people to put information and knowledge into action, they require some kind of emotional connection to that information. So that's why storytelling is so powerful. And so a lot of times when we're teaching people within organizations new concepts, new ideas, we're trying to get them to understand, this is what's going to happen as you go through a transformation or a change. We give them a lot of information. We tell them why it's important, how it's going to happen. We give them procedures. We tell them to follow it. But what we don't do is look at what is the emotional connection that's going to allow them to change that behavior. And that's used a lot in simulations for aircraft. It's used a lot for simulations for surgeons doing, before they perform an actual surgery. It's so that they can flush out those emotional responses and connections, and then be able to try to systematically replace them with something different. So when we use these experiential exercises, we're trying to not just demonstrate a concept. It creates an actual aha moment and a emotional response from the person. And then either that connects them to why something's important to change, or it gives them an ability to reflect on how they would behave under stress. How we think we're going to behave is very, very different than how we do behave. I'm a parent, and I read all the parenting books about how you're supposed to address all situations with kids. And then I had kids. And immediately everything that I knew went out the window because my emotions took over, and I just couldn't apply half of what I read. And so we do that in business all the time. We teach through, here's the knowledge, here's the information. Intellectually, people get it. And then we're surprised when transformations fail, when the change doesn't happen, when people don't apply the learning. But really, we've missed that element of experience. And, experiential learning gives you a safe environment that allows you to experience it when the stakes are low.
So it sounds like it's not enough just to create a procedure and tell everyone to use it or even have people practice it. It sounds like what we need to do is make a connection between an emotion, between a stress response, and that connection needs to be when I have this response, when I have this stress response, when I have this emotion, I need to go to the procedure, not whatever my emotions are telling me to do.
Yeah. And sometimes it's even just getting people to understand that there's a problem. Like, say, for example, you're trying to demonstrate why inconsistency of customer experiences is not, a great thing for a business. When you tell someone that, they go, yeah. But then you can show them and they feel it and they see it and they go, oh, yeah. Oh, okay. I get what you're saying. So it's not even just in your response, but sometimes in even having people fully understand a concept that you're trying to get across as a leader.
Yeah, and so what I understand is you work very hard to make your scenarios hands-on, in-person, real world instead of using computer simulation. We talked a little bit about simulation a minute ago. Why does that make better results for your clients than using a computer simulation?
So there's two aspects to that. A lot of times, even if we interact with technology, we're not still kind of geared towards thinking that the technology is real situations. Like, I know so much of our world is technology, but our brains don't really respond to it in the same way. The other thing is that physical motion tied to learning increases the likelihood that it's going to stick. There's a way that just human nature is that our brains will process it differently. And so when we say something, when we do something, and it's tied to a physical component to it, then it has more longevity, and it has more lasting power with regards to our memory creation.
Is that why people are always telling me if you handwrite something out, it sticks better than if you're typing it?
Yeah, absolutely. Or if you're trying to work through a problem and you can't kind of get the problem wrapped around, go for a walk in nature, right? So there's specific things that you can do that moves your body with when you're thinking, that changes the way your brain processes the information and the memory. And not that computer simulations aren't great and useful in learning, and it's definitely helpful at times. But if there's a core problem you keep trying to solve and you can't solve it, or a concept, you keep putting leadership training in place and it's just there and there and there and shows up, you're probably missing that element that's very human, which is, how do I combine this with some kind of movement, tactile, emotional component to it in a different way?
We talked a little bit earlier about being in the airplane and pilot training and that kind of thing. And a lot of your experiential learning, as you mentioned, is based on some of those methods. So what are the parallels you found between business and the way we do high stakes things in the military? And what else can we learn from the military environment?
So I think there are several things that come to play. So I think being able to practice in safe environments what your responses are without judgment allows you to kind of work through those concerns and any issues that might show up when the stakes are high and you are under stress. So that's one of them. I think another one is that you teach people how to think, not what to think. So when you start thinking about procedures and policies, and that's great. I'm not saying you shouldn't have them, and all regulators will say, definitely don't listen to Laurie if she says not to have them. But the world is changing so quickly, and we'd like to think we go back and we modify them as fast as the world is changing, but we don't. And so we're constantly being faced with new situations, new scenarios that come up. And I think that the military does a really great job of anchoring people in the purpose of why they're there. Same with, all these simulated based kind of professions where you're anchored in the purpose of why you're there. You understand parameters of decision making, and you're taught more of a process of how to think and how to solve problems and how to work together as a team, rather than reading a prescribed set of steps, because they're not always applicable. Sometimes the biggest trouble businesses get in is applying a policy to a situation that is new and different, and it didn't work, right? And so if you get your employees to say, oh, I'm following just rote, policies and procedures, and you take out that aspect and element of thinking differently, having parameters for decision making, you really not only negatively impact your customer experience, but it's been shown to significantly reduce employee engagement.
That was something we would often struggle with, even in the military, even in my days in the Air Force, because we are so technology and procedure driven inside the Air Force and the military in general right now, that we would often be told, well, there's a procedure for this. You have to follow the procedure for this. And we would have to work really hard to convince people this is a time not to follow the procedure. And we're not saying we should do that all the time. We're saying we should do that this time.
Yeah, it's a challenge, and it's and it is a challenge. So when you look at how employees become engaged in a company, they are engaged the most when they are making progress on a meaningful work, right? So if we break that down, it means they have autonomy to do their work. They have agency to make changes that they know are the right changes and decisions to make. And the meaningful work means they know how they provide value to the business, which at the end of the day is serving customers, right? Because that's what businesses are in business for. And even if it's a government, it's their citizens. And if it's, not for profit, it's the people they're trying to support or help or the cause. And you get to the point where these procedures aren't checked regularly and you've taught people to just follow them. Then you end up in situations. I'll give an example. I was working with a bank and, they said no exceptions, no waiving of fees. And so if a customer asked for a waiving of fee, it had to go to a manager. The manager sometimes had to escalate it. And you started getting these 2-week processes to get back to the customer. The customer would call in multiple times. The person would say, I'm so sorry, I have no answer for you. They had no agency. They had no autonomy. They felt, and often those are the people who get yelled at by customers. And so we ended up doing just, if you talk about a scientific review of a business, but it would end up costing in time and energy and callbacks and all of that, $96 to decide whether or not to waive a $28 fee. So every time someone asked for a fee waive, it actually cost them 3 times more than the fee would have been just to waive it. But we don't think about people's time. We don't think about that. And at the same time, you're frustrating the customer, you're disengaging that worker, right? So when we start thinking about, yes, policies and procedures are great, but if they are very specific and rigid and they don't have the parameters and framework for decision making, you're going to go outgrow them constantly. So instead, you could put in some things that say, has this person ever asked for a fee waiver before? No. Is it reasonable to give this person a fee waive? Yes. Can you work with why they ended up being late and needed the fee and whatever, so that you can help the customer prevent it in the future? Sure. Teaching that parameter of thinking allows them then to interact with the customer in a positive way for the customer and feel like they had control over the situation, providing value not only to the customer, but to the business, right? So that's the balance, I think, that it's very difficult to strike because you don't want everyone doing anything they want, but you also don't want people being just rote in their responses.
Yeah, it reminds me when I was in the Air Force, we talked a lot about critical thinking. But unfortunately, we had leaders who talked about critical thinking, not in the sense of, okay, let's sit down and follow some good critical thinking practices. It was more, you don't agree with me, so you must not be doing good critical thinking, right?
Yeah.
I think we've seen that. I saw it in the Air Force. I'm sure people see it in their companies all the time, in their whatever your organization is. Critical thinking can make or break a leader, and a lot of people don't really understand it. How do you help leaders actually embrace real critical thinking skills when it's often easier said than done?
Yeah. So that again is where, some of these experiential exercises can come in and help, because one of the things that helps with that is to show when their intuitive thinking or their inherent biases have led them down a wrong path in a safe environment where they can contemplate the fact that maybe in their business it's happening as well. And then to teach an actual structured approach to it, right? So something that they can use themselves where they are, basing their decisions on data, experimentation. They're kind of working through the components of it so that they can trust that their teams will do it as well. In a truly innovative company, there is going to be respectful disagreement. If you don't have respectful disagreement, you're probably not innovating very much, because the whole point of it is there's so many different perspectives. The mix of being able to change something requires it to being different from the way it is. And you'll never get the full benefit unless you have people being safe enough to go back and forth and to have conversations and to take an opposite stance. With one leadership team, how we went about this is we created a decision-making process, and we looked at how to define a problem, because often businesses are trying to solve the wrong problem. Then we looked at how do you collect data, and what kind of data do you need to collect, and to make sure that the data is being collected by the things that they said are important to them, right? So you have to have customer data, you have to have certain kinds of data, and then to look at options. And one of the things we did is we always put in do nothing is an option, and whatever was the recommended option, which we required 3 at minimum, but whatever they decided was the recommended, they had to actually then think through the opposite of the recommended, so that you're constantly testing your own biases and you're testing that. And then we worked into it, which you'll appreciate. But then while it's a team maybe making the decision, there's accountable parties. And so who then is accountable? And then it takes off into implementation and various things. But that starts slowing down the leadership thinking into a way where you break it out and start demonstrating very, very explicitly, because we actually didn't even do this on a computer. We did this on paper to force it to be in everybody's hands and to change hands, so that they could then get really comfortable with doing it faster in real time. So that it's very challenging whenever we think we know everything. But I think that's the key component, is to break it down into a safe environment where we can start testing some of these inherent biases and our kind of histories and experience in a structured way.
Yeah, I bet as you were working through solutions, once some of these executives started getting handed 5 or 6 or 10 sheets of paper, they were like, okay, this is not the answer. I do not want all this information, right?
Yeah. Or just, it's like, there's so many times when I've worked with a design team and the executives say, this is the problem. And then you get into it and you're trying to solve the problem they hand you, and you realize it's not the problem. That's not the problem. It's a symptom of a problem. And then you have to go back and say, actually, that's just a symptom of the problem. You got to solve this. And they'd say, no. I know it's this. Go get me this. And it's like, the only way to get you that is to solve this. And so it's a structured approach. You show the data, you start actually, showing the results of the experiment. Observation is great. Being a customer is a great thing. Going out and walking through not just the front end customer experience, but then where does it pick up all the way through your company? And even if you're walking through it from a technology perspective, that's a great way to get executives to pause and think about how they think about things, and whether they're actually allowing their company to operate the way that they say they want it to.
Yeah, I think we all know a lot of executives who think they're great at critical thinking. And in reality, they're probably not as good as they think they are. So for everybody who's watching and wants to be good at critical thinking and be a great leader, what are some of the red flags we might see in our companies or in ourselves that shows us that we're actually missing the boat on doing effective critical thinking?
I would say that everything you ask for, you get. So if you've asked for certain solutions to be found and there's a solution for the problems you say there are, you're probably not thinking about all of the scenarios critically. If you're not changing or revisiting or looking at your customer needs, wants, and strategy more than once a year, if people don't disagree with you, you don't want disrespectful. I say that and people are like, I don't want people coming in my office and being disrespectful or telling me I'm wrong all the time. But if people aren't respectfully disagreeing with you or bringing you alternatives or looking at things differently, you're probably not demonstrating critical thinking, because you're not accepting it back in. If all your views are coming back to you, like, that's a good idea, that's a good idea, that's a good idea, you're probably not demonstrating critical thinking. In critical thinking, you're going to be wrong sometimes, and you're going to have to admit you're wrong and change course. If nobody comes to you with that, you probably aren't doing it yourself.
Yeah, we certainly in a military environment, I worked with leaders who dissent was not okay, but we still had to figure out how to do the right thing. And it was an exercise in creativity, trying to figure out, how do we convince the boss this is his or her idea, and then have them tell us to go do the thing that we know we should do, but they will never let us tell them we should do.
Yeah. I mean, I think storytelling is always a great way to help. I think storytelling about a similar situation, but at some other company or some other scenario in an industry is a nice way of helping with that. But truly, a leader who really wants to embrace that and embrace the rate of change and innovation that often they say they do, really needs to be okay with people respectfully disagreeing in environments where you place yourself not as the leader not facilitating a session, the leader being a participant in a session, where a facilitator is allowing for that to come to the surface is another great way of doing that. I was asked this question the other day, which is, how do you know the right thing to do when everyone around you thinks they know the right thing to do? And I said, do you have the decision-making power? And sometimes, but sometimes not. Sometimes I'm being told what to do and I kind of don't think it's the right thing to do. Sometimes I'm being strongly encouraged to do something. And I think that's a challenge a lot of people face, especially in the typical command and control hierarchies that still exist. And, one of the things I would hope that companies can do is really anchor back into the purpose of why they are there. So if you keep anchoring back into your customer experience, if you keep anchoring back into what you want to do and be as a company and the values you say are important, it will guide a lot of that decision making. So, for example, do we increase revenue by a predatory product to our customer base, or do we take extra time and a little more investment to figure out a way to be collaborative with our customer base? And, it'll take longer, but it'll grow over time. Some companies go door A and then they say, well, I don't understand, why our culture looks this way. Well, that's sort of where it's like, if you can really anchor into the two parts, which is let's stay focused on what we do, which is deliver value to the customer from an end to end. And here's the unique way and purpose that we have set out that we want to do this. A lot of your decision making should be self-evident as to what the right thing to do is. Because just because you can doesn't mean you should.
Yeah, as my good mentor in my last assignment in the Air Force, Colonel Ed Redmond, always used to say, is values can't just be a poster we put up on the wall. And if we're not tying all of our decision making to our values consciously, whether we may choose, well, not that value today, right? Or one value over another, but we need to tie our decision making to those values. Otherwise, what's the point, right?
Yeah, and I think that applies to every decision leader's faced with right now. I think it's tied to how you design your products and services. It's how you organize and structure how people do work. It's how you support your talent, how you retain them. It's how you apply technology. If you lose sight of the fact that you're doing it for your core purpose and for delivering value to customers, you can get so lost in activity and things and just, chasing around that you're not even realizing it, but you're going out of business every day. You've lost kind of the plot to why a business exists. So I think that's a challenge, and it's a challenge that people have seen more so with remote and hybrid working, but it's a challenge that's existed for companies even whenever everybody is in an office. If you lose sight of, if they haven't properly articulated and created an emotional connection to the why and those values and the core purpose of a business, and that gets then linked to how do we make decisions and operate and organize around delivering value to customers, then you've really got a lot of problems, right? So you've got high probably customer complaints, you have high customer turnover, you've got high employee turnover, you've got burnout in your employee base. But those are all symptoms to me about really that disconnection from the customer experience and the core purpose.
All right. Well, let's help make a little bit better emotional connection between you and our audience. Let's play a game. Are you up for a game?
Okay.
All right. So this game is called Rapid Response.
Okay.
I'm going to ask you a series of questions. I want you to respond with the first thing that comes to mind.
Ooh, okay.
Now, I'm not looking for one-word answers. Feel free to elaborate, explain, share, whatever you feel is important to answer the question. But I'm just looking for the first thing that comes to your mind, okay?
Okay.
Are you ready?
Yep.
All right. Laurie Clarke, rapid response round. Your time begins now. Podcast recommendation.
I like Mel Robbins.
Okay.
I think she's very practical in taking human issues and challenges and putting it into a way that's relatable and, shows humility and allows you to take action.
One question we should all be asking ourselves.
Is this going to matter in 5 years?
That's a good one, because a lot of times we're doing stuff that's not even going to matter in 5 days.
And we don't let go of things that, are impacting our decision making now, and it's really not relevant to the grand scheme of life.
Someone underrated we should all be paying attention to.
That's a good question. Underrated. So somebody that's not currently in the know. I'm not sure. I have to think about that one. I don't have an immediate response. Sorry. Breaking your rules.
Who's someone you're paying attention to right now?
He's not underrated, but Yuval Harari. And the view of looking at things on a broad scale is a way to predictive. So the recent book I've been reading is Nexus, just the history of information. And, we think a lot of things are novel, but they're not really. They're just in a different format.
Well, he's pretty well known, but I think there's a lot of people who probably aren't paying attention to him who should be paying attention to him. So I think that's a great answer. What's your go-to song to get pumped up, or your walk-on music?
Ooh, my go-to song to get pumped up. It's not really pump up song, but it's Rise by I can't remember her name right now, but she's like, Still I Rise. Doesn't matter what happens, you're still gonna be okay. You'll still get through it, is basically the theme. My daughter would tell you that I'm really, really terrible with artists and actors and anybody with a name that should be well known, and I never know them.
I can't remember anything anymore, and I remember when I used to be cool, and I used to know this stuff, and I don't know any of it anymore. I know who Taylor Swift is, and that's about as good as I get. So
she gets so mad at me because I think every time she plays this one song, I'm like, oh, I like this song. Who sings it? And she's like, you ask me that every single day, right? Just remember. And I never do. She drives her crazy. Now I just do it because it drives her crazy.
Well, I fully support that. The biggest influence in your life?
I think the biggest influence in my life, I think it's actually oddly came from my kids. I think that you think you're going to be a parent to teach and influence and learn the children. And I think that they are there to teach you and influence everything that you need to learn. And I think that's been the biggest influence in my life.
All right. Well, that's a good one. A book everyone should read.
I would say a book that I read every year is The Alchemist. I think every year that I read it, I'm in a different state of mind, in a different stage of life, and I take something different from it.
I know quite a few people who read The Alchemist at least once a year, sometimes a couple times a year. I just got introduced to it a couple of years ago. I've only read it the one time, but I think it's time for me to dust it off and read it again.
Yeah, and I actually think, I'm just thinking about our conversation today. I think so much of what we talk about from a business perspective even can be applied in that book. I hadn't thought about it that way, but just having you ask this question, I think there's so much of, searching and searching and searching and searching, and the answer is actually already there.
Well, that's what I have a podcast for. Best winter recreational activity.
If it's active, I'd say skiing. If it's not, sitting by a fire and reading.
Yeah, and you're up in Toronto, right?
Yes.
So
We're very frosty right now.
Those are easy things for you to do, not so easy. Skiing's not so easy for us here in Vegas, although we do have a ski area here, which is interesting. Wow. Yeah.
Okay.
We've got a 12,000 foot tall mountain not far from here, so they've got a ski area. It's pretty cool. Your dream vacation spot?
I am a huge lover of the ocean, so one of my favorite places to go is Grace Bay and Turks and Caicos. I think it's just relaxed and not overpopulated and quite beautiful.
Okay, good one. I'll have to put it on my list. A business trend flying under the radar right now?
I think, and this is going to maybe unpopular, but I think it's keeping human touch and elements at critical junctures. So, I think the companies that do that are doing really well, and the companies that aren't are trying to figure out how technology solves it, but it's not a technology answer.
Yeah, I think that's good advice for all of us. Okay, last one.
Yeah.
Favorite sports team or player?
Oh, I am not a sporty person. I don't have one. So I would say my favorite sports team is my daughter's volleyball team, and she's my favorite player. I'm really not into sports. I don't watch them.
Okay, so your daughter and her volleyball team.
Yeah.
All
I
right,
watch a lot of that, but I don't watch a lot of professional sports.
Okay. Well, thanks for playing our game. It's great to get to know you a little bit. So to get back to what we were talking about the tie between customer experience and employee experience. Let's talk about how that fits in with company culture and employee experience, and what are some of your experiences with that?
Yeah, so I think, there's a lot of people who will describe culture in a lot of different ways, but my way of simplifying what culture is, it's how work gets done. So it's how you structure your work, how the work is executed, the questions you ask, the way you make decisions, how you meet, how you interact with your teammates. All of these hows of the way that work gets done is culture. And so whenever we look at employee experience, you can get discontent when what the words that are being said don't match the actions. When you're saying, I want you to be innovative, but don't change that. Don't change that. You can't do that. You can't do that. These disconnects between we always want to do what's right for the customer. Let's charge these extra fees and make them wait 25 extra minutes and really require all of this frustration on their part, right? So, it's to be able to create a good culture, you need to, first of all, anchor in what you do, what's your purpose, what's examples of being great for customers, what's a great customer experience, what does that look like, what are the core elements of that, what would we need to do and consider in every decision we make and every touch point that ensures that we still embrace that for that customer. Now let's start building those elements into our, employee experience and how we structure teams and how we measure the team and how we allow them to make decisions and give them the autonomy to make decisions, and how we allow for the problem solving, the innovation to grow naturally and to have a tolerance for change. All of these elements, they either happen because they just exist, or they happen because you purposefully design them. And I think that's where leaders kind of go wrong. They take elements and components of where they're going to try to change culture in what they think is going to work and not do the harder work, which is, do I have a very solid purpose? Have I articulated it properly? Have I created storytelling and emotional connection with everybody to it? Do I have frameworks for decision making? Do I have frameworks for problem solving that include these elements? And then have I organized and structured my company and my talent and my technology to all support that in reality, not just in a sheet or a page on your website?
You have a really great example where you did this with a company, a call center, and you
Yeah.
also tied in that idea of purpose that we were talking about before. Can you tell me a little bit more what happened there?
Yeah, so we we're working with a contact center, and we were trying to look at how to reduce call volume because there were a lot of status calls coming in. It was very expensive, and there were a lot of queues and customer frustration from not being able to get through quickly. And so we were collecting data and talking to team members, and I walked up to a team member and he to ask a question, and then I realized he was looking at football scores, and I said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize you were on break." And he said, "I'm not on break." And I stopped and I looked, and there was 50 some calls in queue. And I said, "Well, if you're not on break, then why aren't you answering the phone? There's like 50 calls in queue." And he said, "Just people wanting their money." And this was a private student loan center. And I went, okay, right? He had no connection to the people on the other end of the phone, people just wanting money. He kind of said it almost with disdain, like, "Ugh, these people want money." And so we ended up taking time to go back and say, the part that's missing here is not just that you want to get people money for their education. It's that the connection to what that means for people. And so we started collecting stories from the people who were calling in, just asking, why are you pursuing this, career? Why are you doing this? And we got stories like, "I always wanted to be a nurse, but I had to stop and take care of my aging parents. And then now I'm going back to school because it's always been my passion. I want to do that for more people." Or, "I was really sick as a kid. I was always in the hospital. I'm fully recovered. I want to go to med school because I want to figure out how to do something different, and to provide that same level of care for other kids." And we started collecting these stories and telling these stories and showing these stories, and then encouraging them to go find these stories. And the more they found the stories, the more that human connection came in. It became more than just answering the phone and getting them their funds, their loan. It was about, how do you actually fulfill and help them fulfill their dreams? And it shifted everything. It was sort of like, you didn't have to start reminding people what the call volume is. You didn't have to remind them to answer the phone or to take their time to understand what the need was. They wanted to do it because they then saw themselves as this facilitator to dreams. And it shifted the whole thing, right? Now, they had to change the measurement around it, because if you're going to really take the time with customers, you couldn't really be measured on a 2-minute call, time frame. But one of the very interesting things from that was, as they started peeling back, the reasons people were calling in, they found that so many people just didn't understand the financial journey. And one of the things that they came up with is the contact center actually fed that information to the sales team, and the sales team created a tool that would help families navigate the financial journey. And in many cases, understanding that made people realize they didn't actually need a private loan. But that sounds bad for business. But this is, again, where you go back to the core values and putting it in practice and decision making. Is, even if they didn't need a loan, they got goodwill from the bank. They actually opened their checking accounts there, their credit card accounts. So the lifetime value might have actually increased by discouraging them or showing them a different path from taking a private student loan. So it was just, but the ideas like that just start flowing from people who feel connected and start asking the questions of customers instead of being transactional toward them.
That's an amazing transformation, all from a really quick conversation about football scores, right?
Yeah, yeah. Well, sometimes the most important things are the simplest things. They're not necessarily easy, but they are the simplest things, and they're right there in front of us to do.
Well, everybody, there's your Clausewitz lesson on military strategy for the day. Clausewitz said, "Everything in war is simple, but simple doesn't mean easy." I'm paraphrasing since I don't speak the original German, but it's easy to get focused on the things that are going wrong in a company. How can we shift our focus to recognizing the people who are doing really great things?
I think it goes back, right? If you're very clear on what matters to you and what type of company you want to be and what kind of value you want to provide to the world, then I think what you do is we all have a negativity bias. So we're going to see all of the bad things. We're going to see all of the problems, but there are really a lot of good things happening. We tend to focus in performance reviews on, okay, you did a really good job. Here are the things you can improve. But we don't actually go out and catch people being good all of the time, right? So we see someone who's going above and beyond for a customer. We see someone who's being an extraordinary team member. Instead of always looking at and demonstrating as to a team what's wrong, start looking at what's good. And because what you focus on grows, the more you focus on the positive things you want to see and how you want to see them, the more they'll grow. It's not to say that the problems aren't there and they don't have to be solved. It just puts a different mindset to problems as opportunities to shift them towards something that is good. So that would be definitely a way of doing that.
Yeah, so everybody start going out and trying to catch people doing good stuff and stop trying to catch them doing bad stuff.
I'd say we focus on it, right? So think about a transformation. You've got, 10% of the people aren't going to change and come on board with you. You know it. Like all of the data shows you there's 10%, whether they self-opt out, whether they decide the direction's not for them, whether the company has outgrown their skill set, whatever it is. And then there's the group that need a little bit of training or convincing and then there's the group that are already adopting and they're just flying through. What we focus on is the 10% that don't get it, the 10% that are never going to get it, the 10% that are going to leave. And what we do is we end up convincing those middle folks that that's what we're focused on. So negativity grows and the problems grow and oh my goodness, this isn't going to work and that's not going to work and this is why and that's why. If we focus on the people who already got it and adopted it, we don't worry about the 10%. They're gone anyway. We shift the middle faster, and maybe it's doing things that don't seem to make sense in the moment. Maybe there's a group of those people who are never going to adjust to the new technology in the order that it's changed. I'll give an example. We changed a way that you put in data collection from a customer into a system. There's a group of people who it didn't matter. Their brains were just so ingrained to the habit of the old way that they just couldn't adopt the new way. Well, there weren't very many of them, and they were at a stage in their career where it would have been terrible to lose their experience, but they're not there for 20 years. So we just took the old, because technology is great, we took the old format and threw it on top of the new one, and they could still follow their habit and process, and it would just populate it in the order that the new one made sense and goes through. So if we focused on the fact that they were just never going to change and they, you just couldn't do it, you got to meet people where they're at sometimes. And I think that is, it's not, instead of forcing something that's really not important, you can think of ways to accommodate in the transition. As those people leave, there's no need for the screen in front, right? As they start moving to different jobs and or retiring, everybody's on the new system. But we don't think to pause and do that. And I think that's a way we can start focusing on that too. And I think, sometimes we lose people who have an incredible amount of experience because we underestimate how ingrained a habit is, even if they want to change it. And sometimes we should maybe be a little more accommodating. I don't know. My sister moved in with us for a period of time, and she rearranged my kitchen. And like, it took me forever to remember where the new glasses were, right? Like, how many times do I even, you open the cupboard. So I don't know why we sometimes expect we just flick a switch and people in a company are going to, adapt to a change that's fundamental to the job they've been doing for 10, 15 years.
Speaking of making adjustments, we're living in a world right now where technology is moving fast. Artificial intelligence is coming along. It's enabling us to do a lot of things that we don't need to be sitting at a desk to do or sitting in an office to do. And then we have this opposing force of leaders wanting their teams to return to the office. How do we reconcile these two opposing forces to help a company transform the way you're trying to help companies transform?
Yeah, this is a very hot topic, and there's a lot of different views on it out there. So I'm going to say this. I think that when we're looking at, where people do work, and we're looking at the policies people are putting in place, and when we're looking at what's available for technology and how you might want to apply it, there's so many opportunities. And when you see rigid policies or black and white policies being put in place, to me, that's a sign that there's an underlying issue in the company that has nothing to do with where people work or the technology that's being used. And I think that there are probably 4 major underlying issues that the company needs to address. And then, I'll talk about how once those are addressed, it helps you clarify those, work where you work and the technology that's available. I think people have become lost with that purpose, like we talked about. As the example I just expressed with the contact center, it doesn't matter where you are, but I think remote work to a bigger degree has taken away that reinforcement of the purpose every day. And it requires leaders to take a bigger step to be able to get that message out there and have it ingrained out there. You really do, as a human, you become accustomed to kind of where you're at, the culture of your home, where you're living and whatever. And one of the things that happened is when you went to work, you stepped into work culture and work mode and work thinking. And when we're working from anywhere, it's not that you don't do that or can't do that. I've been doing that my whole career, but it's that it requires extra effort for leaders to make sure that when people join a company, they've got it. If you look at founders, and the reason they work so well from anywhere is they are so tied to the purpose and they're so tied to the customer experience, which is my second thing. They've become disconnected from the customer experience that, they just lose sight of what that looks like, right? So leaders go, they're not really making the best decisions. They're not making them in the way that I would make them. The customer experience, satisfaction's going down. They all need to come into the office. They're probably disconnected from the purpose. Your customer experience is probably disconnected, end of sentence, and you're not fixing that. And so all of these problems are popping up, and putting them all in one space may fix it, may not, but you still have to address that. I think there's a trust element. I think certain leaders in how they work and how they work well, they assume other people work that way. Everybody works differently. And there's a certain element that comes from in-person interaction that subconsciously you pick up on trust cues better than you do by screen. It's a skill. I'd say my teenagers have it. They can have relationships online and never meet the people, and they have trust and rapport. I don't think a lot of our workforce has it, and I think we need to teach it and not expect people to have it. And then that leads into, for me, innovation. I think, people are struggling right now. Companies are struggling with how messy innovation is and how you need a different type of team and structure and way of working. And they don't know how to do that, with the technology and whatnot. So, I think when you're balancing where people work and you're balancing what technology you apply, those 4 things have to be really nailed down. And then that gives you the who should come in and when. But that's a decision-making framework, again, teaching people how to think about where they work and when and how and why, versus being prescriptive to exactly what that goes. Same with, technology. If the biggest thing you do is have a premium because you're offering human interaction and then you stick technology in, you either have to take away your premium or expect they're going to go somewhere else, right? So anytime I see those, or I see the disconnections, or I see these rigid policies, or the kind of Me Too application of technology, I don't think the company has those 4 elements of purpose, connection to the customer experience, trust and rapport built, and a mechanism for innovation, a true process for innovation in place.
I think it's fascinating. You talked about teenagers having this innate ability to build trust in online relationships, and I never thought of it that way. And I think that's an area I'm going to need to research a little bit more, because that's certainly where the world is headed, and we all need to learn how to build trust online instead of these two poles of I trust everyone or I trust no one, right?
Oh, yeah. And teenagers are great at this. Like, my daughter has friends all over the world. She has a friend she hasn't seen in 10 years, and they would consider each other best friends. And but what they do is, because they've grown up with social media and the harshness of it, they are not all trusting. They definitely have a process to determine trust levels with people, and they have a way of testing the boundaries and seeing what that looks like, what they share, when they share, how they share. And they have these insane networks of friendships. My daughter has thousands of people that if she was trying to figure out which shoe color to buy, and she put out a poll, and literally 2,300 people had a vote on her shoe color she should buy. It's just a world that's just so different from how I grew up. It's different from a lot of the way people think. You would think about, I worked with companies who've spent 8 months trying to figure out what color of shoe to launch, like 8 months of spending money on all of this stuff. And my daughter has answered it in literally 10 minutes in the shoe store, right? So and they pull each other for things in a way that I find very interesting. And then the key to that, though, is, like, my daughter will have a very core set of goals and a core set of values. And she kind of puts it like, if any person doesn't have, 4 out of the 6 values as me, they're in the acquaintance social media category. That's how she gauges whether or not she's very trusting online. It's fascinating.
I agree. It is fascinating. If you're looking for a project, there's a book in there. If you're looking for a project to do,
Yeah. I know.
no,
Yeah, maybe. I mean, and it's so different too, because she's got the mind of an athlete. She's very different. That's what I was saying. The biggest influence in my life is what I've learned from them. And I think that the parenting, and maybe this is a business leader thing too, which is, you can either determine how people are going to be and try to structure the way they're going to lead and develop and in your likeness or in the way you think they should, or you can set some guidelines, some decision-making parameters, some values, and then nurture what comes, because they are I've seen kids that are just whatever their parents want them to be. My kids are not, but they are without being what I thought they would be. I guess that's the right way of saying it.
well, that's your homework, is to write that book.
Now I'm going to write a book. Oh my goodness. I don't know.
And I know you've got the time, because you sold your company a couple of years ago.
Yes.
And we talked about founders before. Selling a company is a dream for many entrepreneurs. What's the one piece of advice no one tells you about achieving a successful exit like that?
You have to, I think that the biggest challenge with founders that don't leave, when they can't leave, is they've made it about themselves. You need to actually build the structure, the process, the systems, the thinking, and be able to leave. And it's hard because, especially if you're taking in outside investor money, you want to be needed because then you're brought along the journey with it. But if you actually want to be able to exit, you have to be able to build all of the systems to exit. And the challenge is the excitement and joy of creation of products, of service, of creating value is a very different skill set than structure, systems, and all of that. So often founders don't have both. They have one or the other. They're the systems thinker or they're the creation person. You need to have both, I think, to be able to be not needed.
That's why co-founder relationships, when they're the right co-founders, work so well.
When they are the right ones, because that's a whole different possibility of mess.
Okay, so besides writing a book for me to read, what's your big goal for 2025?
My big goal for 2025 is to develop an experiential exercise that isn't just in-person based, but actually it is, but adds in all of the components we're faced with right now, with distractions, with various types of ways of communicating, with AI, with the ways that we're going to have to lead differently and communicate differently through that. So it's, I want to add that layer in to help people be able to experience and navigate that with less stress and with hopefully making less mistakes.
Sounds great. I'm looking forward to that as well. I still want to read the book though. All right. So to every leader out there who's looking to lead their people through a big transformation, what's the single most important thing they need to start doing today to make that change happen?
I think they need to put their assumptions to the side and go be one of their customers from beginning to end, and then take a look at their strategy and say, is my strategy really anchored on that customer experience, expanding it, enhancing it? Am I getting the right talent, the right technology to support that? And if they're not anchored in that, then go get anchored in that.
That is a perfect place to leave it. Laurie, this has been so wonderful. Where can everyone find you so they can thank you for joining us today?
Currently, my only online presence is LinkedIn. So you can find me on LinkedIn.
All right. Well, I have that, and I will put it in the show notes so everyone can track you down. And thank you for joining us on the show today with all the wisdom you shared. I personally want to thank you for being on the show today. To everyone watching, if you found this conversation valuable, go ahead and share it with someone who can use it. Leave a comment. Don't forget to subscribe. Also, if you're on a podcast platform and you can leave a review, please leave us a 5-star review. It really helps us build the audience and share what all the great things like our guests like Laurie have to say. We've got lots more coming up, so don't forget to subscribe. Go out there, do great things, keep watching, keep developing your leader's mindset. Onward and upward.